Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're tackling a topic that I'm sure is on everyone's mind, love, or at least one very specific take on love.
Oh, yeah. This is gonna be good.
So we found this YouTube video, and it's by a guy named Zack Mwekassa. He lays out 6 signs that a woman truly loves you.
6 signs.
6 signs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Before you write it off as like some cheesy pickup artist stuff, this video is actually aimed at a French-speaking African audience.
Oh, interesting. So there's probably a whole cultural layer to this.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're going to unpack these signs, see what resonates, what might be totally culturally specific, and yeah, maybe even point out some potential red flags.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do. But that's why we're here, right? To dig a little deeper.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear what Zach has to say.
Okay, so sign number 1. She wants to know your loved ones and introduce you to hers. He really emphasizes this two-way street of family connection.
That's interesting. Right off the bat, we're seeing that family plays a big role here.
Yeah, and in many African cultures, bringing a partner into the family fold is a really big deal.
It's huge. It's not just like a casual meet the parents thing. It's like a merging of two worlds.
Wow. It makes you think about all the potential complications,
Right?
like in-law conflicts, different parenting styles, financial obligations.
Oh, yeah. It's not always smooth sailing.
So maybe sometimes those societal expectations can overshadow the actual relationship.
It's definitely something to consider because you have to wonder, are you truly compatible or are you just trying to fit into this mold?
That's a great point. Okay, sign number 2 gets even more intense. Zach says a woman who truly loves you will be willing to make sacrifices, even opposing her parents for you.
Ooh, okay. This one's tricky.
Right. Because on the one hand, compromise is definitely part of any healthy relationship. But this opposing her parents part, it kind of romanticizes a level of sacrifice that could be unhealthy.
Yeah. Where do you draw the line between a grand romantic gesture and a potential red flag?
Exactly. And, there's this idea in some cultures that romantic love conquers all. But in reality, it's not always that simple.
No, not at all. You have to ask, are these sacrifices coming from a place of love and mutual understanding? Or is there a power imbalance?
I've never thought about it like that. So you're saying Zach's advice isn't necessarily wrong, but it needs to be taken with a grain of salt.
I think so. It's important to remember that context is everything. What might be seen as the ultimate declaration of love in one culture could be a major red flag in another.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Let's move on to sign number 3. She cares about your family's well-being.
Okay, this one seems pretty straightforward, but I'm sure there's more to it.
Right. There's always more to unpack. So Zach gives these examples, like inquiring about a brother's financial struggles or a family member's health.
So it's not just about being polite, it's about showing genuine concern.
Right. But it can get messy. What if your family starts expecting favors, or your partner feels obligated to do things they're uncomfortable with?
Oh yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
It's like, what if my mom starts asking my partner for money, or expects them to be the family chauffeur all the time?
Exactly, and that's where boundaries come in. Couples need to talk about how much family involvement feels right for them.
And how to handle those tricky situations.
Absolutely, they need to be a united front.
Okay. On to sign number 4. Zach says a woman who truly loves you will be proud of you. He calls her your fanatic number 1 and says she'll put you on a pedestal.
I have to admit, this one makes me a little uncomfortable.
The pedestal imagery. Yeah, I get that.
While it's nice to feel admired and supported, being put on a pedestal can create a lot of pressure. You start to feel like you can't make mistakes.
And that can be stifling in a relationship.
Right. It's like you're constantly trying to live up to this idealized version of yourself.
Exactly. Healthy pride in a partner is great, but it needs to be balanced with the ability to see them as a whole person, flaws and all.
So it's not about blind adoration. It's about genuine respect and appreciation.
And that includes being able to have honest conversations, even when things aren't perfect. You need to be able to challenge each other and grow together.
Absolutely. That's what real love is all about.
So it's about loving the person, not the image you have of them.
Exactly. It's about embracing the whole package, imperfections and all.
Okay. Moving on to sign number 5. She doesn't pressure you financially. Zach gives this example of a woman demanding an iPhone 13 when you're struggling to make ends meet.
Ooh, yeah. Money can be such a huge source of conflict in relationships.
It really can. It's like that old saying, marry for love, but make sure your partner has good credit.
Well, there's some truth to that. Financial compatibility is so important.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it goes deeper than just shared bank accounts or splitting bills.
Right,
Right.
absolutely. It's about having similar values and goals when it comes to money. If one person is a saver and the other is a spender, that can create a lot of tension down the line.
You know, this reminds me of a study I read. Couples who argue about finances early in their relationship are more likely to break up later on.
That makes sense. Money represents so much more than just dollars and cents. It's tied to our sense of security, our values, our dreams for the future.
So if you're not aligned on those things, it can be really hard to build a solid foundation for a relationship.
Exactly. Okay, on to our final sign. She encourages you to improve course. Zack paints this picture of a woman who pushes you to work harder. Apply for new opportunities. Become your best self.
It's like having your own personal cheerleader in your corner.
But the key is making sure it's coming from a place of support, not control.
Right. There's a difference between, hey, I think you'd be amazing at this, and you need to do this, or you're a failure.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that both partners need to have their own goals and aspirations.
So it's not about one person sacrificing their dreams to support the other.
Right. It's about finding that balance between encouragement and allowing your partner to be their own person.
And having open communication. If your partner's encouragement starts to feel more like pressure or criticism, you need to be able to speak up.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've unpacked all 6 of Zack's signs. What do you think? Is he onto something? Or is this just a bunch of outdated relationship advice?
Well, I think it's more nuanced than that. Remember Zach speaking to a specific audience with their own cultural norms and values?
Right, context is everything.
So what might seem traditional or even outdated to some could be completely relevant and relatable to others.
Exactly. And there's no one-size-fits-all formula for love. These signs might resonate with some people, while others might find them completely off base.
So instead of taking Zach's advice as gospel, we should be asking ourselves, what does true love look like to me?
And what are my non-negotiables in a relationship?
You know, I have to admit, going into this, I was a bit skeptical of these 6 signs, but I think you've made some really great points about how to interpret them in a more nuanced and thoughtful way.
Thanks. It's all about digging deeper and challenging those assumptions.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we keep coming back to: cultural context. You've mentioned that Zach's advice seems to be geared towards a French-speaking African audience. How do you think that influences his perspective on love and relationships?
Well, family plays a much bigger role in many African cultures than it does in, say, Western cultures.
So it makes sense that several of Zach's signs center around family involvement and those expectations of merging families.
Absolutely. Like that first sign about wanting to know each other's loved ones, he really hammered that point home.
He did, and I think that's reflected in a lot of African traditions and values. Family is seen as a source of strength and support.
And there's a strong emphasis on respecting elders and maintaining those close ties.
So like your partner isn't just marrying you, they're marrying into your whole family lineage.
Exactly. And that can be a beautiful thing, creating this sense of shared history and community. But it can also be challenging, especially if you're coming from a culture where individualism is more prized.
It's like navigating 2 different worlds with different sets of rules and expectations.
Right, and that's why communication is so crucial. You have to be able to talk about those differences and figure out how to blend your cultures and values.
I'm also thinking about the sign about sacrifice. How Zach talks about a woman opposing her parents for you. That seems very rooted in a particular cultural understanding of romantic love.
You're absolutely right. It taps into this idea of romantic love conquering all, even familial disapproval. We see that theme a lot in storytelling, especially in cultures where arranged marriages are common.
It's like this grand romantic gesture, proving your love by defying tradition.
But it's important to acknowledge that this kind of thinking can also be used to justify unhealthy relationship dynamics.
It's like the idea that a woman should be willing to sacrifice everything for her partner, even her own family.
It's a slippery slope, and it's important to be critical of those narratives and make sure you're not being pressured into making sacrifices that you're not comfortable with.
So it's not about blindly following tradition. It's about understanding the cultural context and making conscious choices.
Exactly. And it's about having the courage to question those norms and expectations, even if they're deeply ingrained in your culture.
This makes me wonder, do you think we're all susceptible to these cultural influences, even if we're not consciously aware of them?
That's a really fascinating question. And I think it's probably true to some extent. We all grow up surrounded by certain messages about love and relationship.
From our families, our
Yeah.
communities, the media we consume?
Exactly. And those messages can definitely shape our expectations and even our behaviors without us even realizing it.
It's like we're all carrying around this invisible baggage from our cultural background.
And sometimes that baggage can clash with our partner's baggage, creating all sorts of misunderstandings and conflicts.
So what can we do about it? How can we
Yeah.
become more aware of those cultural influences and make sure they're not sabotaging our relationships?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How do we unpack all that baggage and make sure it's not like running the show, you know? Well, I think the first step is just being aware of it, you know? Acknowledging that our background, our culture, it's all shaped how we see love, even if we don't realize it.
So it's like taking a step back and really looking at those beliefs we've always had. Like, are they really our beliefs?
Exactly. And being open to the idea that our partner, they might see things totally differently. You know, it's like you said before, invisible baggage. We're all carrying it. And sometimes it bumps into someone else's baggage, and we don't even know why things are going wrong.
We're just on different wavelengths.
Totally. And that's where talking comes in, you know?
Yeah.
Communication. We got to be able to talk about those differences, but not in a way where we're like pointing fingers. It's more about understanding each other.
Instead of you're wrong for thinking that way, it's more like, help me understand why you see it like that.
Yeah, exactly. Curiosity, not judgment. And being willing to bend a little, find that middle ground where you both feel good.
Makes me think about couples who come from really different backgrounds.
Mm.
You know, like different cultures. They must have even more to figure out.
For sure. It can be amazing learning from each other's cultures and all, but it takes a lot of patience, being open-minded, and willing to try new things.
So maybe Zach's 6 signs. They're not really rules. It's more like he's showing us his culture's take on love.
I think that's a great way to put it. And it reminds us there's no one right answer when it comes to love. What works for one couple might be a total disaster for another.
So it's not about finding the right answers. It's about finding what works for you.
Exactly. And being willing to change and grow together as your relationship changes too.
You know, after all this, I'm realizing love is so much more than just a feeling. It's a choice we make every day to be there for our partner, to understand them, and to help them grow.
It's about what we do, not just what we say.
Okay, before we wrap up, one last thing for our listeners to think about. We've talked a lot about culture, different ways of seeing love, but do you think there's anything about love that's universal? Something that's true no matter who you are or where you come from?
That's a great question. And I think at the core of it, love is about connection. It's that deep need to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel like someone else truly gets you.
It's like we all want to belong, to know we're not alone in the world.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes us want relationships, to be close to someone and to build a life with someone who shares our values, who sees the future the same way we do.
So maybe Zach's 6 signs, even though they're from his culture, they're pointing to that universal need for connection.
I think so. Whether it's wanting to know each other's families, making sacrifices, or helping each other grow, it all comes back to that need to connect.
This has been, wow, really eye-opening. I feel like I see love in a whole new way.
It's been great, and I hope our listeners feel like they can look at their own ideas about love and build relationships that are real and fulfilling.
So on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.